Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Nerd Ledger. I'm Kaje. I'm by myself today because it's a Friday. Usually we podcast on a Thursday, but here's the thing. Yesterday, Thursday, February 26th, was my wedding anniversary. 5 years. 5 year wedding anniversary with my wife, and by putting my 5 up there, I unfocused the camera. So if anybody's watching, camera's a little unfocused. If you're listening, you're like, why are you talking about this? Nobody fucking cares. Shut up and move on. Anyway, so yes. So we're not able to podcast this week, but I still wanted to talk about some things. And then next week, we won't be able to podcast because I'll be out of town for work. But I'll be coming back on Thursday, but I won't be back till like 6 or 7 at night. So, it's a bit late. So I wanted to still put out a podcast, obviously, because there's a lot of stuff happening. And yeah, so here I am. The other thing I thought about talking about was Night of the Seven Kingdoms, because I've watched it all. I know Cher thought about watching it, so a little bit waiting for him to see if he does watch it. If not, then I'll talk about it at some point. But I actually have some coworkers who have watched it, and so I've extended the invitation, at least for one of them, if he'd like to ever join the podcast, just to talk. It's one of those things where like people who haven't podcasted before feel like there's some kind of pressure to it, but there's really not. Like the podcasts I've always structured, and sometimes it doesn't always work out this way, but the way I like to do it and the way that I did it with my good buddy Captain Hot Sauce years and years ago when we did a podcast called the Nerd Ledger. No, that's the one we're doing now. It's called Nerdy Boys Reviews. We would have conversations, right? We would go to the comic book store every week, and we'd have conversations between ourselves with the employees that worked there, other patrons, and we kind of wanted to just do that, but record it, and that's how that came to be. And we talk about the TV shows we were watching, we talk about the comic books we were reading, we talk about stuff happening in the nerd world, announcements, movies, TV, whatever. So that's how that came to be. And then this is kind of just an extension of that. And so it's really simple, right? Like, you have these are people I work with. We talk about random things all the time. And that's all it is, just talking. Sure, there's a little bit of structure to introduction and blah, blah, blah. And, these are the things we're going to be talking about, as in a couple bits of news and this. But there's no work that really goes into this other than what I'm doing right now, because we just enjoy talking, so that's what we do. And so like sometimes I do a little bit of pre-work on news and things like that, but like ultimately I don't expect that of anybody else. I'll help move the conversation along and ask the questions and work out the structure. So they have nothing to fear. If they wanted to just come on and talk about Night of the Seven Kingdoms, we could do that easy peasy, lemon squeezy. So, yeah. Anyway, all that is to say, next week I might do another Friday episode, but today I have to talk about the Warner Brothers deal, because that's massive in the news. A little less massive is Sony. Now, Sony has annoyed me for years, and they've annoyed a lot of people for years. No surprise, because they suck. They put out a lot of drivel to continue to hold the rights to Spider-Man, and so it's irksome. So maybe I'll give a little bit of background. So for people who don't know, Sony owns the film rights to Spider-Man, and they have forever, since the 90s. Maybe even before that. I think he was probably the first character Marvel sold, while they were experiencing some bankruptcy scares in the 80s. So Sony's owned them forever. And they released the Tobey Maguire movies, they released the Andrew Garfield movies, and then they struck a deal with Disney in 2015 to allow Disney to use the character of Spider-Man in some crossover capacities and to do, a film trilogy, or a couple films or something, right? So it was like X number of cameos, X number of solo films. And they would also dictate who in the Spider-Man world of characters that they own Disney could use and who they couldn't use. And so that's where we are today. Disney is able to use the character of Spider-Man, but Sony still wants to hold the rights. And so that's why they pushed out Venom and Venom 2 and Venom 3 and Madam Web and Morbius and Kraven. And when I say we, Cher and I have talked about it, and even going back to when I would podcast with Captain Hot Sauce, we talked about it. And the reality is, the first Venom movie was a bit of a pleasant surprise. Like, it wasn't a bad movie. It was decent. We kind of liked it, but we also knew it could lead to more movies that are pointless. The reality is, most of these characters, because they're Spider-Man villains, people don't care about without Spider-Man. And that's that's the sad reality that Sony has yet to face. So on top of that, they have released some news that is a little concerning, because what Sony has done really well is the Spider-Verse films. The two Spider-Verse films were really good. And again, you can't fully give credit to Sony. You can give credit to them for greenlighting it, but it's the people they hire to work on it that ultimately make it what it is. Obviously they get the credit because they made the right choices of who to hire, but we still can't say the same for their villain movies. But after the failures that were Kraven and Madam Web and Morbius, Sony is planning to reboot their Spider-Man universe. So their CEO Tom Rothman confirmed the company has plans to reboot Sony's broader Spider-Man universe after a series of high-profile flops in films like Kraven, Madam Web, and Morbius. This comes from a conversation with Matt Belloni on The Town, in which Rothman answered a series of questions with fairly short yes or no responses. When asked, is the larger Spider-Verse dead, he said no. He then confirmed Sony would go back to those films at some point, and also affirmed it would be a fresh reboot with new people. And he did not provide any further details from there. They're just not good films. Like, that's the reality. And even if they were, you'd still run the risk of them being box office failures because they don't have Spider-Man. It's the struggle that we face, across the board, because other comic book stories have tried to do this, where you focus heavily on the villain. And some villains you can pull that off with, right? Like, Venom did become a hero in his own right, but if you're doing a kind of origin, lethal protector kind of story, you got to start somewhere. And starting where you start without Spider-Man, maybe not the best start, right? Like, we had the Penguin TV show, which was great, and there's no Batman in it. I mean, obviously his presence was there because it takes place in Gotham, but we first saw that character in a Batman movie, right? So there's something there. You can make the argument about Joker, which I don't really agree if your argument is, well, they made the Joker film and that was very successful and awesome and it was great and blah, 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 and there was no Batman in it. Sure, you got me. Other than the fact that it wasn't about the DC Comics character Joker, you got me. And technically Bruce Wayne was in it, but still, right? This is not a movie about the DC Comics character Joker. This is a movie about a lot of things, a lot of important topics, a lot of important themes, but not about the character Joker from comics. So anyway, that's all very unfortunate that Sony hasn't given up and hasn't decided to sell the rights over to Disney. But even then, you would run into some issues potentially. I'll give Sony the credit for the Spider-Verse films. Hopefully Spider-Noir, the new Amazon TV show that's coming out in May, is decent. It looks decent. I'm a big fan of the character. I remember reading a graphic novel about Spider-Noir back in 2010. That was probably the first time I read a Spider-Noir comic. It was a graphic novel comic, but it was really good. I enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to the character, and I also loved being able to play that character after reading that a couple years later in the Shattered Dimensions Spider-Man game. So that was really cool. Sorry, I had to take a sip of a beverage because I've been talking a lot. All right, now we're going to talk about the Warner Brothers thing. So I'm going to give the full timeline so people understand kind of what's going on and how did we get here in case they're not up to date. So late 2025, Paramount starts this pursuit for Warner Brothers. And Warner Brothers announced kind of that they wanted to sell. They were thinking about splitting in divisions, with like Discovery being its own division and, you know, the films and stuff being a different division. And so, you know, Paramount essentially putting in a bid early accelerated that process for them. And Netflix soon entered the race. So in early December 2025, Netflix and Warner Brothers agreed to a deal, right? And Warner Brothers was set to receive $82.7 billion. Well, not set to receive. That was the price of the acquisition. $82.7 billion in a merger under which Netflix would buy Warner Brothers studio and streaming assets. The deal was approved by the Warner Brothers Discovery Board, and it was expected to close after regulatory review. On December 8th of 2025, Paramount attempted a hostile takeover, essentially, because they felt that their offer was already better. They were offering $30 a share versus like the $27.25 that Netflix was offering. Warner Brothers Discovery's board rejected that offer on value and risk grounds, keeping the Netflix deal in place. On December 22nd, 2025, Paramount sent a revised offer. They submitted a formally revised unsolicited tender offer. Warner Brothers Discovery confirmed receipt but continued to recommend the Netflix agreement while reviewing the new proposal. So now, early 2026 in January, Netflix had enhanced its offer to an all-cash bid. Originally, they were saying, we'll give you $23-something in cash and $4 and something in Netflix stocks, and, you know, that's our offer. The Paramount offer was all cash. It was guaranteed value, and, you know, it was a better offer, and that's why they were trying to do a hostile takeover. So Warner Brothers, Netflix was essentially forced to up their offer to all cash. February 5th of this year, Paramount publicly campaigned. They issued public letters and commitments to content creators and regulators advocating continued investment in Warner Brothers Discovery assets and community support. It also added sweeteners like covering Warner Brothers Discovery's breakup fee owed to Netflix. In the middle of February, Warner Brothers Discovery granted a limited waiver to Paramount. This allowed Warner Brothers Discovery a 7-day waiver under the Netflix agreement, or Warner Brothers could negotiate. This was where the shift started. And then the past couple days, really, Paramount sent a new refreshed offer. They raised their offer to $31 per share in cash, approximately valuing the company at $110 billion. They also agreed to a quarterly ticking fee if the deal takes longer than expected. They offered $7 billion in regulatory termination fee if regulators blocked the merger, and they also gave $2.8 billion to Netflix as a quote-unquote breakup fee for what Warner Brothers owed Netflix if their deal was canceled. Yesterday, Warner Brothers Discovery declared Paramount's bid a superior proposal. They declared 31, whatever. It triggered a 4 business day window in which Netflix could revise its original merger terms to stay in the running. Netflix declined to match. Their leadership said that matching or topping Paramount's $31 offer made the transaction no longer financially attractive and did not counter-offer. With no counter-offer, Paramount effectively won the bidding war. And as of today, Paramount and Warner Brothers Discovery have agreed on the $110 billion acquisition, including the enhanced financial structure from Paramount's bid. The deal is set to move forward pending shareholder votes and regulatory review, and it's expected to potentially close later this year. Obviously, the regulatory review thing is a big thing. So let me kind of recap a little bit more. So I don't know if everybody remembers, but at one point, Paramount was like really invested. They were doing all this stuff to try to woo Warner Brothers, and it seemed like they got ghosted, and then announced that Netflix had sent a deal. That it's kind of crazy how far we've come with this in just a couple months. But all the liability here is on Paramount, essentially. If the deal falls through, they got to pay $7 billion because of regulatory things. They already paid $2.8 billion to Netflix. Like, they're doing all this shit, right? And if anything bad happens where it doesn't go through, they're on the line for a bunch of money, and I don't think they actually care. So let's talk a tiny bit about the corporate and financial strategy for Paramount. Their approach included multiple rounds of revised bids after being rejected. The involvement of Ellison family funds, right? So David Ellison is the CEO of Paramount. So they're using family funds, sovereign wealth partners, and personal backing from tech billionaire Larry Ellison, who is David's father. They shored up the financing concerns, and they also positioned their deal as offering certainty, higher immediate cash value, and broader ownership of all of Warner Brothers Discovery's assets, including CNN and cable networks, compared with the Netflix approach, which only focused on the studios and streaming. So now we can talk about some concerns a little bit that people have. The deal moving so fast has sparked a lot of regulatory and political scrutiny, including concerns about media consolidation, antitrust risk, and the political ties of the Ellison family. Essentially, is this merger, is this acquisition granting too much power to Paramount? Is what's the question that's going to be asked, and it's going to be asked in a governmental inquiry, and who knows what's going to happen with that. Critics of this acquisition, especially from some Democratic politicians and media analysts, have warned that the merger could be problematic in terms of reduced competition or editorial influence, particularly at outlets like CNN. So the concern here is that I'll tell you what the online concern is. People view David Ellison as a lapdog for Donald Trump. Whether that's true or not, I couldn't tell you. But that's the public view. And so there's this thought out there that they will take CNN and ABC and use them essentially as totem poles for Donald Trump and his people and whatever else. I tend to not really pay much attention to that kind of stuff. You understand the concern from a freedom of the press viewpoint and whatever else, but let's be honest, CNN is not, impartial. Fox News is not impartial. CNN is a cable news network. That's literally what it stands for. And whether they're talking about Trump in a positive light or a negative light, in my opinion, is fairly irrelevant. You know, you talk about too much market power to Paramount. Well, if they turn CNN and ABC into major platforms for Republicans, then you have them and Fox News and Newsmax as your these are all Republican platforms. You still have MSNBC on the other side, and if there's a void for it and people are looking for the Democratic liberal leaning content, someone will rise up to fill that void. That's typically how it works, right? Now there could be concerns about that. There could be people saying no one will ever allow it, blah blah blah. If there's demand for it and it makes money, it'll happen. CNN hasn't made money really for a very long time. I believe a couple years ago, even they had a newer CEO who was trying to change a little bit of the programming to help them make more money, to become more profitable. Because at the end of the day, that's what they're trying to do. They're not there to necessarily be impartial and present things in a manner that is accurate and true. It's a lot of opinion pieces. It's a lot of headlines, and it's the same as Fox News, but on the other side, right? And people might not like that. They might not want to admit it, but they're two sides of a coin. And if you want the truth, you have to watch both and see what they say that's similar, because the truth always kind of lies in the middle of these two extremes. Now, again, I don't believe in any news network being, a bully pulpit for the president of the United States. That should never happen. The reality is, it always happens with the networks that lean towards the political party of whoever's president, and they get out there and they don't criticize them. They talk about how great they are. Fox News has always done it with Trump. CNN did it with Biden and Obama. Biden to a certain point. But, all these, you understand the concerns. I don't think they're the legitimate concerns that'll dictate whether the regulations shut down this merger or not. But let's talk about what happens next, right? So the acquisition still requires regulatory approval in the U.S. and abroad, right? It's not just here. It's the same thing that happened when who was Microsoft trying to purchase Activision or something, and it got shut down in the UK and whatever, antitrust. But there are going to be antitrust reviews before it can close, and that can take many, many months. Paramount is now looking to integrate Warner Brothers' vast studio streaming, cable and content library assets, potentially reshaping the entertainment landscape. Netflix, who pulled out, received the breakup fee and is refocusing on the core growth and strategies in streaming and content. So, really, that's where we are. We thought Netflix was going to get it, despite the fact that Paramount always had a better offer. They shored up a lot of parts, I guess, that put them over the edge, and now they're gonna acquire Warner Brothers Discovery, and that's a lot of assets that they're gonna acquire. So, will it get through regulation? Maybe, maybe not. Who's to say, really? But the reality is that if they do merge, what does that mean for everything? That's the question, right? And of course, like I mentioned, you have concerns about whether or not certain platforms of theirs get transformed into something they've never been, and what kind of impact that has. What potential opportunities does it open the market? Which does it close? Because that's going to be the bigger concern, is if they have so much power and so much share of the market, they can do what they want, and it's going to be hard for anybody to step in and try to do anything about it. What does it mean for the things in the works? Currently, nothing. I mean, obviously, as far as Warner Brothers goes, we know that we got more DC movies coming out. James Gunn and Peter Safran are leading the DC universe, and they have all these plans and ideas. And so there's already questions about, well, are they going to stay on board? Are they going to get ousted? What are they going to do with those assets? And I think all of that is going to take a lot more time. Right now, it's going to kind of be, as it was, right? We're going to keep the status quo for a while and review all these things. And even then, if the movies are successful, they're not going to come down and be like, oh, you've made some decent things. We're going to go in a completely different direction and fire you guys and do whatever we want. Like, if there's money to be made, they're going to try to make the money. So I think even then, regardless, I mean, they're going to, at the top, right? David Ellison and the guys at Paramount, at the very top are going to set the corporate strategy, and that trickles down to everybody else. And so they're not necessarily the ones that are going to go say, we don't want James Gunn and Peter Safran anymore. It's more likely going to be someone heading up the Warner Brothers side of that conglomerate. So, and it'll be the same thing. Like, they'll hire people to head up, the CNNs. They'll hire people to head up all these different divisions that they have, and they set the top strategy. How do we get more turns? How do we get more butts and seats for movies? How do we increase our digital asset revenue and all this other stuff? So there are going to be a bunch of people under them that are going to manage all those things. So it's not necessarily them at the top saying we're going to completely restructure and from the top up fire everybody and whatever, start from scratch. Like these things already exist. So there's a lot of projects and money being spent on things that are already in the works, and I don't think they're going to stop that. With the Harry Potter series, with the DC stuff. Obviously, there's always some conversation about the Lord of the Rings because Warner Brothers has licensing stuff for Lord of the Rings, but a couple years ago, Embracer actually bought the film rights to the Lord of the Rings, and they licensed it out to Warner Brothers for The Hunt for Gollum. I believe that's how it works. I haven't fully researched it, but I remember Embracer had bought the film rights, and similar to how Amazon is able to use certain rights for the Rings of Power, those were licensed out from the actual Tolkien estate. So, there's all these licensing agreements, but Warner Brothers does get licensing agreement for Lord of the Rings still. So what does the future of that look like? You can ask, technically. The future of Harry Potter, the future of DC, all these other things, right? And again, I understand the political climate concerns with CNN, and I don't know what's going to happen with any of that, and I don't think anybody does. So it's not like worth really getting super worked up over. Like, if the U.S. government decides that this breaches a bunch of antitrust laws, then it won't happen. So we'll see. We will see. There's still the same concerns that there were with Netflix about movie theaters, theatrical releases, all that stuff. Like, there are still people genuinely concerned that it could hurt the film industry. It can hurt the movie theater industry, which is already hurting, and so you're gonna have those concerns as well. It's all to be seen. There will be not only lawmakers writing letters and bringing up potential concerns with this merger. There will be actors. There will be celebrities, people in the spotlight that are going to be opposed to it because of everything we've discussed. And it is a lot of power for one studio to have. So whether it was Netflix, who there were already a bunch of concerns about, or Paramount, who there should be the same concerns about, you're gonna have all this uncertainty surrounding it. So, I mean, that's it for me. That's all I wanted to talk about. Really, was the Sony stuff, and then this Warner Brothers acquisition. So very interesting stuff. This seems to be the end of the saga. I mean, I feel like I've been talking about this for months because it's been going on for months. And when it was first happening, I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting, like, ooh, And now it's far less interesting. It's just unsettling for many people. So anyway, much love. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Click all the buttons, do all the things. And we'll see you next time. Bye. Hold on, I gotta click the button. And bye.